Good morning and welcome to today's webinar about changing the future of Europe's energy mix, where we're going to be talking about what role different technologies will have in the EU's energy transition. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm coming at you live from the heart of the EU quarter in Brussels. Now, here in Brussels, we know that the EU Green Deal is one of the main standard-setting policies that we're talking about here now in Brussels. It was adopted by the European Commission almost exactly a year ago now, and basically every policy that's come out since then has been shaped by it. The idea is that it's a framework policy that's supposed to be horizontal across all different sectors, all different policies. So that includes, for instance, industry, housing, transport, and even trade. And it's all building towards this ambitious goal of reducing carbon emissions down to net zero by 2050. That means that the EU would reduce its emissions to almost zero, and any remaining emissions would be made up for by carbon sequestration projects, anything that takes carbon out of the air to undo the carbon left that the EU has. Now, in order to get to that target, significant investment is going to be needed in the energy sector. An investment will be particularly needed in Europe's electricity markets, especially if we're going to be asking electricity to do a lot of the heavy lifting the fossil fuels used to do directly, such as powering cars, for instance. If people are going to be driving electric cars that need to be charged instead of driving petrol-fueled cars, well, then the electricity suppliers are going to need to be able to actually supply all of that electricity to cars. So there's a lot being asked here. But European electricity markets are currently undergoing structural challenges due to a lack of capacity and funding restraints. The sector worries that the investments that are needed aren't being made to help the electricity grid deliver on the energy transition. There are also continued security of supply concerns, particularly in Eastern Europe, where there remains a great deal of energy dependence on Russia. But these countries are coming from a very different starting point than Western European countries in terms of GDP per capita. So where's the money for all this needed investment going to come from? And which emerging energy technologies are going to get the investment? These are big questions being asked here in Brussels right now. What are the technical challenges for the European energy sector that it's facing in view of implementing the Green Deal? And how important will the role of all the different technologies like offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, gas, hydrogen, nuclear, hydro, how are all of these things going to interact, and which technologies are going to be prioritized, even as the EU uses an approach of technology neutrality? We've assembled a panel of experts to talk about these thorny issues here today, but before we go to that panel, I would like to hand it over to Adam Giborja-Czetwertyński, Undersecretary of State from the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Poland. He is going to, via video, deliver today's keynote address.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to very warmly welcome you to the high-level debate on changing the future European energy mixes that is co-hosted today by the Polish Electricity Association. As in the European Union, the debate on the most efficient pathways towards climate neutrality is ongoing. I'm convinced that today's meeting is really a great opportunity to offer a valuable contribution to our transition towards climate neutrality. This transition will redefine the way the EU economy is functioning, and it will also secure a sustainable future for us and for the next generations. However, it is not coming without challenges. It will be exposing some member states to severe impacts of this unprecedented transition. And the ongoing debate on climate neutrality and the best ways to achieve it should take into account that member states significantly differ in terms of their energy mix and economic situation. Poland supports the European Commission in its view that the electrification will be key in delivering low-emission solutions to the EU economy. In hard-to-abate sectors where electrification has smaller potential, there are other available solutions such as hydrogen. The first pillar of the transition is the wide development of renewable energy sources such as wind and solar power units and the development of distribution networks. Investments in renewable energy sources are the best ways to bring clean energy to all. In order to succeed, the investments in renewables need to be widely supported and promoted both by public and private sectors. Therefore, we welcome the initiatives of the European Commission aiming at streamlining public and private support for the development of renewable energy. Electricity distribution networks are the second pillar of this transition, ensuring that grids are capable of integrating the growing share of renewable energy is of paramount importance to avoid any disruptions. Firstly, the integration of huge volumes of intermittent energy from renewables will require from the network smarter and more flexible approach to ensure that electricity is delivered to customers regardless of the weather conditions. Secondly, with the high-tech solutions applied, distribution networks can play a crucial role in delivering new innovative solutions, assisting the decarbonisation of multiple sectors such as road transport or buildings. It should be kept in mind that investments in transition technologies should be considered as the investments in line with the objectives of climate neutrality. For countries like Poland, whose energy mix bears the hallmarks of the previous regime, such a transition investments are the most efficient pathway towards more climate-ambitious solutions such as solar and wind energy. Investment in gas-fired plants can help to halve our emissions and will gradually shift from fossil fuel-based fuels towards innovative clean energy sources. Moreover, it seems to be important to avoid prejudging on the role of these investments in the future. Some companies are already seeking solutions that will allow gas-fired plants to be hydrogen-ready. The combusting of renewable gases in these plants will allow them to comply with the net zero emissions objective that we have set. And therefore, they can become part of the zero emission energy system. It is far too soon for us to prejudge on the outcome of this technological race and which technologies will be able to bring us to climate neutrality. To sum up, as we are at the beginning of the journey towards climate neutrality, I would like to encourage all the decision makers to avoid narrowing the transition to only few technologies. Energy sector is currently developing very innovative solutions which will be able to change the way we consider existing energy systems and technologies, and which will be able to significantly contribute to the achievement of the energy and climate objectives. In my opinion, only a truly technologically neutral approach, which takes into account the different starting points of various member states, can allow us to reach our joint goal. And I would like to encourage our distinguished panelists today to join the discussion on the technologies which can shed the light on our pathways towards climate neutrality. Thank you very much.
So there you have an outline of some of the opportunities and some of the challenges as we look at this energy transition. All issues we're going to discuss with our very distinguished panel that we've assembled here today. Let me now introduce them. So from the Commission, we have two people. Hélène Cré is Head of Unit for the Clean Energy Transition at the European Commission's Research and Innovation DG, and Pietro Mena is a policy expert with the European Commission's Energy DG. Then we have Gilda Amorosi, Head of Energy Policy for Climate and Sustainability at European Electricity Association, Eurelectric, We have Christopher Hurst, Director General of the Projects Directorate at the EIB, the European Investment Bank. And finally, Tomasz Dabrowski, Director of the Polish Electricity Association, PKEE, who are supporting today's event. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. You guys at home are going to be able to ask your questions to the panelists. You can do that using the Q&A feature of Vimeo. It's on the left-hand side of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and start that Q&A now. So from this moment, you can start typing in your questions there. It would be great if you can say who you are and what organization you're coming from. But if you want to ask your question anonymously, that's okay as well. I'll be reading the questions out at the end of the panel to the panelists. The Q&A, remember, is just for questions, not for statements. If you'd like to make a statement, you can use the chat feature. So don't ask questions in the chat feature and don't make statements in the questions feature. All right, let's start out with some opening questions for the panelists. Helen, let's start with you. As I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of investment is going to be needed for this transition, not least in the area of innovation for all these emerging technologies. What is the European Commission doing to encourage investment in the research that's going to be needed to develop the technologies to meet the EU's climate goals?
Thank you very much. First of all, good morning to all, and thanks to the organizer for this invitation. What is the European Commission doing? I mean, we are doing quite a lot, of course. So research and innovation is everywhere in the green and digital recovery we have to implement after the crisis. The first point, of course, is what we are doing first and foremost is to fund the coming new program on research and innovation, Horizon Europe, which we still expect to be able to launch very soon, although despite the multilateral financial perspective, which are a bit slowed down for the time being, as you know. That's the first point, and we have big emphasis on the mitigation of climate change. Another point which is very important for us, and I have to mention it because this is supposed to be a technical, more a technical debate. However, behind this technical debate, we have the citizen. So we pay attention also to match to the needs and serve the best our citizen. The second big part we are doing is to build links with the investment decisions through research and innovation investment agendas, through supporting various funding on innovation especially, and through disseminating or giving results of our projects, and through cooperating with the industry. One good example is in the coming new program for research, the partnership between public and private, where industry and the EU participate half and half to the research and innovation in one specific domain. This is the case for hydrogen. We are also building alliances, which are more on the side of the deployment, on the industrial side. So we're no longer speaking on research, but research has a role also to play on that. If I give to you an example of an already existing alliance for a long time, which is batteries, the research and innovation is providing strong support through the work on new types of electrolytes, which will be more circular, using less materials, but being more efficient. So this is the type of things we do. And of course, we do another side, which is the foresight, because we can rely upon the academia all around the world. Research is open to the world, and we can accelerate the transfer of knowledge and also putting together a lot of brains. So all in all, this is what research and innovation can bring. And in technologies, it is very important. I would like to conclude by that. I was very interested and very supportive to the keynote speech from the Polish minister, because it's exactly the right issue he mentioned. This is that we have to use all the means we have if we want to reach our objectives. It's not to go to one single type of energy or one single type of enabler. Then we have to use everything we have. There are sectors hard to abate, which will need specific solutions, and there is no one size fits all. That's something which is very, very clear for us in research. We need all the solutions. We need to accelerate the solutions. And when I say accelerate the solutions, it's also research and innovation to help to improve industrial processes. It's not only on the technology, it's also on the production means, how to deliver the best and how to support our industry. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Hélène. Let's turn to Pietro now to get the perspective of the Commission's Energy Department. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has said that the European Green Deal is going to be Europe's new growth strategy. Like I said, it's going to be this horizontal strategy that's going to mean a widespread change to the structure of our energy system. So Pietro, are you confident that Europe can make this change to meet both the 2030 and the 2050 targets?
Thank you for the question, Dave, and good morning to everybody, to the speakers and to the audience, of course. The challenge we have in front of us, it's huge, and this has been already said. You said it very well, Dave, into the introduction, and it has been also said extremely well in the keynote speech by Hélène before me. I would like one thing, first of all. I would like to say that if one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. And at least right now, we have a direction. We have a clear direction. Then we can catch the favorable wind. And I think this is the first positive aspect to look at of the transition which has been launched by our Commission. Then I would like also to have with you, to exchange with you, what is your view of the transition that we have to do? How do you imagine the future? How do you imagine the future energy system from now, where we are now in this moment, and where we will be in 2050? Well, we will have very, very likely, we see an expansion of renewables. Mostly it will be wind, both onshore and offshore wind, and depending on the level of introduction of new energy vectors, like hydrogen, for instance, this expansion of renewables need to be even bigger, larger. We, from our scenario, what we see really huge expansion in the installed capacity that we will have at the time horizon 2050, something like 10 times what we have now in Europe. This is what we can start looking at this future system. And then, of course, this huge development of renewables will require the network. This has been said very, very well in the keynote speech. And would need the development of the infrastructure that should be done at the same pace to support the transition. And then you need a soft part system that often is not mentioned. Here, you need a lot of communication and control systems. You need to build protocols and architectures to integrate renewables in the smart grid. This sector of smart grids and intelligent network will be in system to make the network intelligent, with the protocols, with the communication system, will be in very high demand. But it is not finished. The third part that I see here, it's of course storage. If you integrate this huge amount of variable renewable within the energy system, we need storage and system flexibility. This is more or less the picture that we have in front of us from now to 2050. And I think it is a very useful exercise for each of us. Start imagining in which way we want to reach this system. Maybe you will imagine a little different system than this one, but I think it is important that we have in mind something where to go. Otherwise, no wind will be favorable.
Thanks, Pietro. Gilda, let's turn to you next. You are dealing with the electricity sector across Europe's various geographies. What challenges is the electricity sector as a whole encountering right now when it comes to the energy transition, and how is it uniquely placed to help the transition?
Thank you, Dave. So thanks for inviting Euroelectric to this interesting debate. Indeed, as an association, we represent all the technologies that you have mentioned, Dave, in your introduction. I think the starting point for us as power sector is that electricity is decarbonizing, and it's decarbonizing quite fast. 66% of the electricity generation mix in the first half of this year is low carbon, including, therefore, renewables and nuclear. And according to our estimates, this is expected to go up to 80% by 2030. The good news is that this is also the direction where member states are going altogether. So indeed, I agree with the previous speaker. We have a direction and member states are on board with it. And if you look at the NECPs, so the commitment that member states have put forward towards the Commission recently, Amber Climate has estimated the electricity mix in 2030 based on those commitments, and it is indeed about 75% of low carbon electricity in 2030, so very similar to our estimates. And countries that also have different starting points, like Central or Eastern European member states, are also on board with this if the transition is obviously mitigated by compensation mechanisms like dedicated funding or technical assistance. This is a bit the picture when we talk about decarbonization of the electricity. And I think that the role of electricity in this is the fact that as a vector, it is very well placed to help decarbonize also other sectors like transport, heating and cooling, but also industrial processes. I agree with the other speaker from the Commission on this. If we look at how to do that, there are still some barriers to unleash this potential of the use of electricity. To mention just a couple, when we look at indeed the massive need for deployment of renewables in the future, not only in the horizon towards 2050, but also if we look at this decade, from now on until 2030, some practical issues that our members are encountering are related to permitting. It's becoming increasingly difficult, depending on the national rules, to get the right permitting and fast permitting to invest, for example, to create a wind park. And another aspect, for example, if we look at transport, the potential of electrification of transport is massive. However, we need to have a EU strategy for charging infrastructure to enable that. Overall, I think electricity is ready to deliver, to help member states deliver decarbonization, but we need to get some part of the regulatory framework right in the process. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, let's turn to you. When we're talking about financing, obviously the EIB has a critical role. What kind of support does the EIB have for these types of enabling technologies?
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be with you. Well, we've already heard from other panelists and from Dave and the Minister on setting the framework. We have to underline that we have to get to zero, and zero does mean zero. So everybody has to get there. If somebody doesn't get there, then somewhere else we have to have a carbon sink, which is hardly practical. So we all have to get to zero. Clearly, the power sector is key in that, given the current emissions that come from the power sector, and also in the future, as we progressively electrify the economy, then there will be the role of power will take a ever increasing share. I mean, the good news is that we see the cost of renewable energy is competitive. We see wind projects. We fund renewable energy projects throughout Europe, and we see the prices that emerge from those, and we see prices emerging from auctions that are competitive for wind and for PV. I mean, we still need to have additional technical progress. We've just heard about the difficulty of permitting for new sites, and obviously wind farms are a visual impact that not everybody is happy to have. So we have to increase the power that we can get from a particular site when these wind farms get to be repowered, which some of them won't be that far in the future. Clearly, offshore wind would be is a game changer, and it could be the largest source of electricity in the future. And we're busy funding those projects too. There too, we need more research and development. And floating offshore wind would be really a game changer, because it would allow us to harvest much more wind. About 80% of wind resources that we could harvest are in depths of water more than 50 meters, which is not possible with trying to put a support into the seabed. So if we could develop offshore wind, that would dramatically change things. It's already been mentioned that we have to develop storage systems and batteries, and we're also busy funding that area as well. And there are issues there about recycling. I mean, you may not know, but when a car battery comes to the end of its useful life in a vehicle, it still has about 70% of its storage capacity left, which could be recycled to other purposes. But the current design of batteries is not taking into account this second use afterwards. So we need also to have to look at how we can maximize recycling of things throughout the EU economy. As regards what is the EIB doing beyond these projects that I mentioned, we've recently set ourselves a target that we would increase the share of lending, making a positive contribution to climate action, to 50% of our total business by 2025. And if we look over the decade, we're lending a bit more than 60 billion a year. So if we look over the decade, we believe that would support of the order of €1 trillion of investment in these areas. The other thing we've done is on the other side, the other 50%, which there's still investments that still are coherent with the Paris objectives without necessarily making a positive contribution, which we call Paris aligned. And we've recently come up with a set of definitions for what that means. One of the things in the energy sector is that we have decided that we would not fund any more fossil fuel supply, nor indeed the power generated from fossil fuels, including gas, that is unabated. Now, I know that raises a difficult questions and different points of view about the role of gas as a transition fuel, but we believe that given the falling costs of renewable energy, we should put all of our efforts there in the short term. So we have a real challenge. We do start from different points, but the end destination has to be the same for all of us. And we know that that's going to be a power grid based on renewable energy, and we know it's going to be a shift most likely from carbon as a feedstock for heavy industry towards hydrogen. And so we need to try to get there as quickly as possible, because we don't forget that the target is 0 in 2050. But that target comes about because we have 600 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the world that we can still put into the environment if we want to keep to our Paris goals. And that 600 billion tons is equivalent to more or less 15 years of our current levels of pollution. So we have to start now getting down we get to 2050 because it's just a steady decline starting from now to 2050 that gives the same sum. But we have to start now already, and we have to start moving as quickly as possible. So I think certainly the incentive for the IB is to try to support renewable energy technologies as much as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So Gilda spoke about the electricity sector throughout Europe. Tomasz, let's get your perspective. What are the specific and unique needs of the Polish electricity sector?
Thank you, Dave, and good morning, everyone. From the beginning of the discussion on increasing the EU level of ambitions, Polish Electricity Association is calling for the framework which will take into account the national and regional specificities of member states' economies and energy mixes. The aim of such an approach is to ensure that no one is left behind in the transformation, and that the EU framework provides us with a solution tailored to the needs of all member states and to their decarbonization paths. In Poland, the transition mechanism needs to take three aspects into account. The first aspect is to provide volume of clean energy for the Polish economy. That's obvious. This requires significant investments in rolling out of the renewable energy and in strengthening the capacity of the Polish distribution networks. Our members have already enshrined the ambitious investments in renewable sources to their long-term strategies, focusing on solar and wind energy, including offshore wind. The second aspect is to ensure the adequate level of energy security for the country. Transition towards a clean energy system requires cleaner but also dispatchable backups, which would not be dependent on the unforeseeable conditions or weather. In this regard, we consider gas technologies as the missing link, enabling transformation from the current energy and heat generation paradigm towards more sustainable one. This approach will halve the emissions intensity of Polish electricity sector, improve air quality in cities, and in the same time will not raise the concerns regarding the energy security or security of supply. Finally, as the coal plays a historically important role in providing stable energy to the power grid, as well as the coal industry is a major employer in certain regions, the smart strategy of exiting from coal is a must for ensuring social acceptance of transition in Poland. Our member companies are advocating for a strategy which, on the one hand, will soften severe impact of transition on the coal regions, but on the other hand, will release potential of energy companies to develop their low-carbon portfolio. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Helen, I want to start with a question for you. You mentioned, of course, that the Commission is technology neutral and that a basket of technologies are going to be necessary. But from a research and innovation perspective, are there particular technologies that you see as most promising in particular areas?
Thank you. There are, of course, a lot of promising technologies in renewable energy, and there is also a lot of developments which are happening to produce clean hydrogen. The research and innovation is not only focusing on which technology, it is also supporting, as I said, the improvement of industrial processes and all in all the efficiency, which means reducing the cost, because one of the problems of the technologies is the cost comparison with, especially with fossil fuel, but between themselves. So there are there are innovations, there are technologies ongoing, there are many, but I have maybe to say one or two words on technology neutral. One of the, you have the impression that we develop all in all and everything, and it's a little bit without a policy choice, but research is a specific thing because we don't always know what we will get. So we need to try a lot. And this is a specificity of research. You cannot say, I want this type of things, and so I have to develop it. Pietro was very right in saying that most likely a big share of the future renewable energy will come from wind and solar. That's clear. It does not mean that the others will not contribute, on the contrary, and it depends very much on local condition. So maybe you have to see developments in wind, which are accelerating. Development in on solar, on wind, on offshore. Sorry, solar offshore on the platforms. You have a lot of new technologies. Also, you have improvements going on in also in. Geothermal, even if it's a small amount, it could be the solution on some places. So the flexibility is a master word. And in research especially, being technology neutral means trying without having blind eyes. It is perfectly consistent with the strategy, which is to develop offshore renewable energy, but it's also taking into account the fact that Europe is very diverse. You have a lot of sun in the south, you have a lot of wind in the west, you have geothermal in other places, and this is the richness we have to exploit. That's why it's very difficult for me to tell about new research, because there are enormous amount of new research. But the question mark is which one will be the one to be implemented, and where, and under which condition. I'm sorry if it was not really your question, but it's how we see it in research.
No, I think that makes sense. As you say, it's a nuanced answer, because which technology is favorable where. You certainly can't say one thing for all of Europe, because the conditions, as you say, are so varied. Gilda, let me put this question to you as well, because you're also looking at Europe's various geographies. Are there particular technologies that you think should be prioritized for investments regardless of geography, that would work kind of anywhere?
Yes, so there are different aspects to this question. Obviously, as Len mentioned, you have as many energy profiles as the number of countries that the EU has. So I'm going to state the obvious. Obviously, this energy profile depends on heavily on the availability of natural resources and patterns that are difficult to influence, like weather patterns. And some countries are also really blessed with this natural resource. I'm thinking about the Alpine region with hydropower as well. So this is also why I think politically it's easier to agree on EU-wide energy or climate objectives, but it's way more difficult to go down to national objectives. I remember this type of debate during the discussions in the framework of the clean energy package. And when it comes to, I mean, the fact that there's so much, the energy profiles are so different means that the energy mix are different, and it means the countries have a different starting point in the decarbonization journey. And obviously, as Eurelectric, as we represent the utilities, the national associations and the power utilities in Europe, we're aware of these different starting points. And this is where I think the priority of looking at the just transition is very, very important. So It has been one of your electric priorities. We have been following the negotiation on the Just Transition Fund about it. We have also been looking at the impact of implementing energy and climate policies on households in a specific research. And I think when it comes to the technology part of your question, the impact assessment that the Commission has issued not so long ago provides a good overview of where we are going in the next 10 years. In general, again, at EU level, the generation mix continues to move away from fossil fuels, and there is a general massive increase of renewables. Now, the different sub-levels of the development of the different technologies will vary throughout Europe. When it comes down to the just transition, some countries in Central Eastern Europe, or sometimes also in Southern Europe, may look at issues like the coal phase out and see, for example, some specific technologies are let's say, easier to implement to replace coal, is the case of natural gas, for instance. While some companies in the same countries can think of a wider potential of investing in renewables. And this type of trade-offs, you can find them throughout all the different countries, again, because the energy profiles are so different.
Chris, I have a question for you, Chris. Tomasz mentioned in his comments that, so Pietro, you have a comment on the technologies.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pietro.
Because just let's try to break the ice. Otherwise, we have this scheme quite, I have something to add on this reply. I think it's also important. There's a dimension here that is not considered when we talk about the countries and technologies. I think we should look at the value chain and at the way the value chain of the technology is developed in our countries, in our member countries. And we have done this exercise in a way. We have looked at this, and we have seen that at the end of the day, looking at this side, at the supply side of the technology, we have a much better view of the potential and on the possibility of Europe to deliver the Green Deal from technology point of view. And then I think this is a debate that should be done. Maybe we will do in another occasion, but I invite you to look at this side of the coin, which often is neglected. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, good point, Pietro. So, Chris, I wanted to ask you about something Tomasz said, which was that gas should be considered as a kind of bridging technology to help us get to the goals. I know this has been a controversial subject at the EIB, to say the least. What is the current thinking of the EIB about the role of gas in the clean energy transition?
Well, for the EIB ourselves, we have decided that where our benefits, the benefit of our lending should be in developing renewable energy and not in developing transition fuels. I mean, the issue we have is in 30 years' time, we have to get to zero. And so it is possible in that transition that natural gas plays a role. But what should that role be? And how do we avoid getting locked into the natural gas as a fuel, given that it's only going to be able to make a contribution for relatively short period of time? And so as we see the renewable energy price tumbling, as we see battery prices becoming much cheaper, we think that that's where we EIB should be better placed. I mean, it's not that we wouldn't fund gas itself, but we have an emission performance target, which indeed there is going to be an emission performance target for power generation also in the EU taxonomy, which is due to come out in the spring. And that also was at a level which means that in order to be coherent with our goals, there has to be some sort of abatement of the emissions coming from a normal combined cycle gas turbines. I'd just like to add a word in just transition, because I think the key issue with just transition is not whether we choose natural gas or we choose renewables, or how quickly coal mines shut down. The coal power station is switched off. The question is what jobs do we generate for the people who are currently working in areas where there's essentially a single industry active, coal mines supplying coal for power generation and for steel mills. We know that has to stop, and so what do we do to make sure that the people living in those areas have proper livelihoods to replace their existing livelihoods? And that's obviously not working in the power sector. That's doing other things. That's creating new jobs. And so what we have to do is ask ourselves, what do we do to make sure that new employment can come to those areas? And that's around things like training of people. It's around things of making sure that the urban environment is properly maintained, properly kept, properly developed, so the businesses want to relocate to these areas. So there's a whole set of packages that we should do around that. And we should say this is not the first time that this has happened. There's plenty of regions in Europe where globalization has led industries to move away, and where there's been the same problem that has been faced, and indeed with coal mines that have shut down previously in other parts of Europe. So we have to try to learn from those areas about how we go about keeping economic activity going in these areas when the one source of people's livelihood had disappeared.
Yeah, I want to come back to that issue of the just transition mechanism specifically. But first, Tomasz, I just want to get your reaction to what Chris said about gas as a transition fuel. Clearly, for the EIB, there is room for funding gas as a transition fuel, although there's limits. I think it can sum up it that way. So if I could get your reaction to that, and then also, how would you react? I mean, a lot of environmentalists are concerned that gas is getting locked in, as Chris mentioned, that if we do fund gas projects now and gas pipelines, that we will be locking ourselves into gas for several decades rather than the short term that Chris is really talking about.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps I will start off by saying that the situation across the EU regions varies significantly. Some member states in the past, for decades, have invested in gas-fired generation. And therefore today, when they have to expand their share of renewable sources, they have a much better situation, and they are in fact better off than other countries. Some countries are blessed, on the other hand, with favorable conditions to develop renewable sources, and they can easily do this. And other countries, they have indigenous resources, and now they have to part ways with them and give up using the indigenous resources and develop renewable sources. On one hand, it's a very positive aspect of sustainability, because this is very good for the environment. We reduce the CO2 emissions and all this what is covered under the Green Deal. But on the other hand, we compromise the energy security, because the indigenous resources are there when they are needed for security of supply issues. And for such countries, it is simply very difficult to arrange and manage the whole process of transformation. And for countries like Poland, gas is one of the answers. Even before 2050, we can reduce the emissions that are coming from coal by replacing it with gas sources, and in this way emit less, and be prepared better before 2050 to expand more renewable energy sources. For every government, I would say it is a choice between sustainability, competitiveness of the economy, and security of supply. And if you look at these three objectives as at a triangle, it should be an equilateral triangle. So the right balance is in fact in the middle. You should not neglect none of the policy aspects, and security of supply is one of them. On the other hand, In order to accommodate more renewable energy sources in the power grid, you need some kind of generation, some flexible generation, clean, and gas can be the answer. So I'm happy to hear from the side of AIB that perhaps there is a room for discussion on how to finance the gas infrastructure.
Pietro, let me put this question over security of supply to you. We heard there from Tomasz that there should be three sides of a triangle: competitiveness, security of supply, and climate, and that those should be considered equally. How do you in DG Energy view that? Do you see security of supply as an equally valid concern to climate change?
That's a good question. You know, as Directorate General for Energy, security of energy supply is, of paramount importance to us. We put this, I would say, first in the list of the priority, of course, because we wanted to make the transition, but we cannot leave the citizens without heat and power. Otherwise, we will not succeed in doing the transition. Now, in which way we concretely act?
I think Pietro's feed has frozen. Let's just give it a second to see if it comes back.
I can tell. Can you hear me? There is.
Yes, you're back. You're back now.
Okay. That are in preparation and are already launched, which takes care of this aspect of the security of the energy supply. We don't want to destroy the system. We are, I think, here when we talk about the new regulation for the system integration. We, of course, we take care in which way the new sources of energy. Some of them are variable energy, like renewables, will have to be integrated in the energy system, in the electricity system, in this case, for assuring the continuity of this energy system. We have a continuous dialogue with the member state and with at the level of the transmission system operator to have this continuity assured in a way. And I think this is from our part, from DG Energy part. I think this is really our first priority: provide the security on the power and on the heat for the citizen.
Let's come back to the issue of the just transition mechanism, which was, of course, agreed specifically to help regions that are more dependent on fossil fuel economies like coal. The funds can go to a whole bunch of things. One of them is to help transition those regions into developing other economies if coal mines have to close and that kind of thing. Gilda, let me ask you about the just transition mechanism. Do you think it's going to make a big difference in terms of not only helping those transitions happen, but also in really in spurring the energy transition to new technologies?
As a power sector, we think that the Just Transition Fund and mechanism have this double aspect, as it was mentioned by Christopher as well. We see it as a big opportunity to, indeed, if you need to support some regions to move away from a fossil fueled economy, then these funds within the Just Transition Fund, but also in the other pillars of the mechanism, can go to support investment in smart and clean electricity. including infrastructure. At the other side, obviously, is workers. So sometimes, indeed, it's not possible to replace one-to-one, for example, a coal power plant with another type of plant and technology exactly in the same spot. So there is indeed the need for support for workers. I think there is an aspect that sometimes is not debated so much on, which is acceptability of citizens in the transition. So if on one hand, part of the just transition mechanism can be used to also finance the technological transition to move away from fossil fuels economy, on the other hand, I think particular attention needs to be given to the effect of this transition on households and on workers. I mentioned earlier that we did a study to check how to mitigate the fact that some of these policies that are needed to support the transition have sometimes disproportionately negative impacts on low-income households. And obviously in some regions also in workers that have their livelihood linked to fossil fuels-based economy. And we saw that there are mitigating measures that could be introduced while energy and climate policies are introduced, and the effect is really to counterbalance this disproportionately negative effect that low-income households or some categories of workers can have because of the transition. And when we looked at the macro regions and the results, so when you introduce mitigation policies and instruments, we saw that the parts of Europe that, and the households in Europe that are the ones that will benefit the most are in Central Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. So I think that when policymakers look at how to approach the just transition in general, there should also be consideration for acceptance and for making citizens feel and workers feel that they are not the victim there, but they can actually be uplifted by the transition itself.
The Polish government was a big impetus behind setting up this Just Transition Fund. They really were the champion of the fund. What kind of difference do you think it's going to make for Poland specifically?
It's a good question.
It's a question for Tomasz.
Oh, okay. Yes, it's true. We were advocating for just transition very strongly, as we fear that any transition could have winners and losers. And we sense that when it comes to the power sector in Poland, we may have to bear higher costs than the others, and we are afraid to be the losers of the transition. That is why the Polish government and Polish MEPs were advocating for an adequate compensation mechanism, and I believe that just transition is one of them. It has to take into account, and I fully agree with Gilda, the social aspect of the whole transition, but also the economic aspect of the transition, and I would also add an energy aspect. We do not want to transform the power sector in such a way that all the power generation disappears in the regions. We still would like to keep some kind of energy component in the region after the transformation. Preferably, that would be the zero carbon technologies like renewables or even nuclear. But all these aspects, they need to be taken into account in order to gain the acceptance of a society, economic actors in the country, and at the end of the day, the government.
Well, you mentioned nuclear. We've actually had two questions come in about nuclear, so I'll make those the the first question I'll take from the audience. A reminder, you guys watching at home can ask your questions using the Q&A feature. That's the little icon with the question mark. I see some questions are coming in the chat. If you could just paste them into the Q&A, that would be great. So first question is coming from Martin K. What role do you see for nuclear power in order to reach the EU's 2030 target and net neutrality in 2050? Let me put that question to Pietro. What role do you envision for nuclear?
Okay, Dave, you have the difficult questions always for me. Okay, I'm joking. But you know, at the European Commission level, we leave to the states the decision on the energy mix. And then, in a way, we do not, especially in this case, we do not position, let's say, ourselves. We are in general technology neutral, but in this, especially in the case of nuclear, given the debate which is open in Europe, and you know this, it is transparent. We have some member states which are against, other member states which do develop and use nuclear. The Commission leaves the choice on the energy mix to the member state. What I can tell you from what I see from the modeling, from the scenario analysis that we develop for looking at the transition and for looking at how some technology develop with respect to the others, I can tell that, and this is also public. You can find this easily on the Commission website. If you go to the climate target plan, for instance, you will see this scenario analysis developed. I don't recall an expansion of renewable in Europe, if I'm not wrong. I do recall a very huge expansion of renewables in this scenario analysis, which of course scenario analysis has the limit that you all know. They are not prediction. They are just a way to let us think to the future in a structured way. But nevertheless, the useful indication how the future can be. I don't recall expansion of the nuclear capacity in Europe, given under this analysis.
Chris, let me put this question to you. I mean, nuclear is something that requires obviously a huge amount of investment. And so I'm not sure that, smaller loans are something that's relevant to nuclear, but I mean, what is the EIB's stance on nuclear as a carbon-free source of energy?
Clearly, nuclear energy does not produce greenhouse gases. In that sense, it's clearly a carbon neutral investment. It is something which we could lend to. I mean, something that is included in our list of potential investments. As you say, the sums of money are huge. So even though we can make quite large loans, it would be a very small share of any new capacity investment. And frankly, we've not invested in nuclear power other than some relatively small safety improvements in a few locations for a long time. And I don't think that we would intend to start funding nuclear projects in the future, given that there's plenty for us to do with which in the renewable space, which of course don't have the same potential impacts on the environment as potentially nuclear power does. So I think our own future is, whilst in theory we could do it, that we don't actually see ourselves being involved in the nuclear power sector.
Helen, does that apply to research and innovation as well? I mean, I guess the innovation has already been done in this area, right?
You mean in the area of nuclear?
In nuclear, yes, yeah.
This is a specific question. I fully support what Pietro said. The energy mix, sorry, remains in the hands of the member states. We provide with solutions, and it is their decision. On the nuclear, we have a specific program, and it has a specific orientation, and again. Whether nuclear will be a solution or not, it's a political decision of the member states. So the only thing we do in research is, for the time being at least, to foresee the development of renewable energy. I think maybe one different answer is we have to look at what is existing and what is needed. What is needed is indeed to boost the development of renewable energy, and that there is no doubt. Even if in countries having a nuclear power plants, they are fully committed to develop enormously the use of renewable energy. The magnitude and the process, the way, the time frame to do it is decided together with the countries, because again, they have their autonomy in energy mix, although there is an impact, of course, at the level of Europe. But there is no doubt on the immense need for increasing drastically the development of renewable energy. And that means something which is much more than technology. It means to look on efficiency and cost. And both are different. I don't think you can just say that economies of scales will be sufficient. That's, for me, it's a big mistake.
Let me take this next question. This is coming from Niels Haxthausen. Tomasz, I'm going to put this question to you. He's asking about whether it's really feasible to think that gas infrastructure being built now would actually be discontinued by 2050, which would be in line with the plan. I'm going to read out actually the longer version of his question, which came in the chat. Current gas investments, for example, the Baltic pipelines, have business cases based on using them after 2050. Isn't it naive to imagine that they will be shut down early? Why not redirect the investment to electricity infrastructure and renewables? So do you think that it's realistic to think that gas infrastructure being built now could be shut down by 2050?
But perhaps we have to distinguish two things. Gas infrastructure meaning pipelines, and gas infrastructure meaning installed capacity that could cater for the needs of adequacy issues in the system. Those are two completely different aspects. And if we look at the second aspect and see that gas has a huge potential to halve the emissions of the existing coal, then we should look at this problem in a completely different angle. Whether they will discontinue after 2050, then this is perhaps a question of stranded assets after 2050. Perhaps we should look at it as some kind of cost of transformation. If we want to reduce the emissions now and be prepared for better renewables in the future and storing facilities, then perhaps it is worthwhile doing it and nevertheless investing in these technologies. Otherwise, we'll have to wait with the renewables, because it will be a natural choice to expand the lifetime of the existing infrastructure and use it as long as it is only possible, instead of taking the investment decisions now and transform the power generation fleet. And I would like to come back to the previous question on nuclear. Perhaps, again, it should be looked from two different directions. If we look at 2030 targets, then nuclear, only the existing nuclear can play a role, because it's already there and is supplying the electricity that is carbon-free. But if we look at the needs, then nuclear power, we can only count on it by 2050, in the case of countries where they have no nuclear, like Poland, and would like to have one. The time horizon to build and start operating of a nuclear power plant is a very long one, and it is only possible after 2030, 35, perhaps 40. But this can be part of the solution for 2050.
Well, the question about gas infrastructure is a difficult one, so I'm going to put it to Pietro. Again, from the Commission's point of view, is it correct to say that the Commission's strategy here does envision gas power being phased out by 2050? And if so, is it realistic to think that gas infrastructure built now would be decommissioned by that date?
I'm not sure that I get correctly the question, Dave. I don't know. I will try to interpret it and answering my way. But the point is that natural gas is of course it's appears like a transitional sources toward the transition to the carbon neutrality. Now the point of the stranded asset that can be generated by building pipelines that in the futures cannot be used. I think in part is faced by designing the gas pipeline and also upgrading some of the existing ones in a way that they can accommodate hydrogen transportation, hydrogen flow. I think this is a partial reply to your question, if I understood well, by the way, and to avoid to have too many stranded assets along the transition. Nevertheless, natural gas today, it's a lower emitter than other fuels.
Yeah, I think that
in terms of CO2.
So we have another question here is coming from Freddie Apps. I'm going to put this question to Gilda. He says, fuel cell electric vehicles seem much more sustainable than battery driven. Why not more emphasis to prioritize this? Obviously, your electric energy utilities would be supplying the electricity to the cars, not involved in the manufacture of the cars, but do electricity providers have a preference for fuel cell or battery?
Yes, so obviously we see a very big potential for electrification of transport, as I mentioned in the beginning. I refer to direct electrification. So this means whatever final appliance that you can plug to take the electricity via it. So when it comes to passengers vehicles, we see a much bigger potential for direct electrification rather than a situation where you can have passenger vehicles fueled via hydrogen. And this is just really a matter of efficiency. So with EVs, electric vehicles, you can just plug in the electric vehicle and get the electricity out of it. There's a battery that can also store electricity, and in a system that is smart enough, you can also see these little batteries in everybody's garage as a source of potential flexibility. When it comes to hydrogen, you need to first make hydrogen, which can be made from different sources, and then use the hydrogen to power the fuel cells. So in the process, you lose a lot of efficiency. However, hydrogen has potential for other uses that we see that may be harder, where the emissions can be harder to abate. and it could have a potential for other types of transport, for example, long-haul maritime, and it can have a potential for some industrial processes. Although, as a bottom line, not sure there is a big potential for hydrogen in passenger vehicles.
Makes sense. Helene, is the Commission still technology neutral on this subject of what type of battery for electric cars?
Well, about hydrogen and batteries, there are, of course, I would like to come back to this idea of flexibility. There is a danger in saying hydrogen is good for this and hydrogen is good for that and battery is good for that. The situation is not that clear-cut, far from it. Hydrogen is an enabler, like electricity. And the role of enabler is that, the interest of enablers is that they can be cross-sector. So we have developed in the EU the concept of hydrogen valleys through mission innovation at the international level, and we fund it through the partnership, the fuel cell and hydrogen. The idea of the hydrogen valley is that you could have in one specific industrial node or in one specific standalone region, it could be an island, it could be an isolated part of the EU, it could be a lot of things. But we have developed this concept that in some specific conditions, hydrogen could be more interesting because it is serving various uses than purely relying on electricity. I would quote maybe two different examples when I speak on local conditions. One is Groningen, where you have a gas network which is existing, so where having hydrogen feeding, replacing previous gas and feeding all the applications, including, by the way, heating and cooling, was relevant and competitive. The other example is the Orkney Islands in the north of Scotland, where they function with whole hydrogen for any application. Let me quote another example, which is, for instance, the case of a local medium-sized city in the south of France, where they have just switched all the fleets of the local authorities, including public transportation, to hydrogen. So we cannot say it's good for public transportation, it's good for private transportation, or it's not good, or it is reserved to heavy-duty vehicles, or it's a bit simplistic. It is very true that hydrogen has a natural way to support decarbonization of some hard-to-abate industries and some let's say, some modes of transport. But it's not that simple. That's what I wanted to say. And that explains that some countries, like, for instance, South Korea, are supporting you to buy a hydrogen car, while some other countries, or some other part of countries, like California, are investing massively in docking stations for hydrogen. And on the other hand, we are developing also in other parts of the world electric cars. So both can coexist. It's again a matter of flexibility. And I wanted to compliment, because I find it a bit rough to say it's only for that use. The reality is much more complex, and it depends on local conditions and cost comparison. Just to say that. Because at the end, the cost of hydrogen is also depending very much, when it's clean, from the source of production, the cost of the source of production. So I hope I have given maybe a complementary light. It is true that in big data, there are some specific utilization for hydrogen, but in reality, it's a little bit more nuanced.
Chris, does the EIB have a stance on whether fuel cells or battery are a better investment?
Not really. I mean, we back research and development, which is done by industry players, and it is the case in Europe that most auto companies are betting more on battery technology, at least for the short term, than they are on hydrogen-based fuel cells. We have to see how that goes. I can quite believe that all of the life cycle issues around batteries are not fully taken into account in that decision. which does raise a question about government policy. At the end of the day, we are reactive. We have a neutral view on technology, and we're reactive to supporting research and development, which seems to make sense. And certainly developing batteries does make sense, because even if in the vehicles in the future there's a shift towards hydrogen, it's quite likely that the batteries will remain an important contribution to storage of the variable sources of energy that is produced by renewable energy technologies. So we think it's worth also developing battery technology now.
We have a last question here from Wraith. The question is, should the Commission limit the autonomy regarding the energy mix of each member state in order to reach a higher efficiency? Pietro, I'm going to put that question to you. Both you and Helen have reiterated that the choice of energy mix is a national competence. But do you ever get frustrated with that? Do you ever wish that that wasn't the case, and maybe EU policy could be more efficient if more energy competencies were passed to Brussels?
Hélène, do you want me to start and then you complete, or you want to start? Do I start? Okay. No, we don't feel frustrated at all, Dave, for a very simple reason. Because if you look really to the big scheme, you see that from one side we have energy efficiency that we are implementing in increasing way, and then we have targets for energy efficiency already in place that right now 32.5% will be increased. We will have new legislation that will be launched mid-June 2021. On the other side of the coin, we have an increasing share of renewables. Then, Dave, you understand that at the end of the day, at the level of European Union, we are, in a way, directing the energy mix. Not too much, I would say. Well, let's say less and less is left at the national level. This is my view.
Helen, would you agree with that?
No, it's not only that I agree, but I strongly support that. And we have in the EU a very big principle, which is subsidiarity. So we should not do at the EU level what is better done by the member states. It's very true that the objectives which are decided at the level of the EU and which are decided with the member states, I mean, it's not, we are not enemies at all. These objectives are dictating some choices de facto, but the way they implement remains in the hands of the member states. And I could never be frustrated when we implement the treaty. Simple as that. So it's a tricky question.
That's a very good Commission answer, I think. Tomasz, would you agree with the assessment that while member states can choose their energy mix, as Pietro said, the Commission is more and more guiding that choice? Do you think that's the case, that that's becoming more and more the case, and is that a good thing?
It's a very good question. I would say that despite the subsidiarity principle, the Commission is not only guiding, but sometimes is creating a situation when it is a forced choice. We must not forget that in order to change anything in the country, in fact, we need usually some kind of state intervention. And this touches the issue of state aid and exclusive competence of the Commission, where the Commission has the final say whether it will be compatible or incompatible with the EU rules. So in this way, in fact, the EU and the Commission has the control over the technological choices in any country.
That's a very interesting topic. I imagine we could have a whole nother debate about that. But that is all the time we have for today. We want to get your final thoughts from each of you about today's discussion. Let's start with Helena. We'll go in the same order. Helena, what are your key takeaways from today's conversation?
Wow, alors là, it's a 1 billion euros question. Huh? It was extremely rich. I think there is, for me, a first question mark, which is popping in regularly, which is the respective balance between the national and the EU efforts and how we can better harmonize both of them. Because the case of Poland is very enlightening on that. So that's the first question. The second is this path towards decarbonization and climate mitigation strong enough to attract enough investment? Seeing also some uncertainty on the political choices, like the recent discussion on hydrogen and batteries, for instance. So, and the third for me, but of course I am EU-driven, that's for my job. But the third is finally how could the EU could more accelerate, could help more in a way the member states, and especially seeing the current situation. And maybe we missed a point, which is the overall recovery and resilience fund for that, and the national energy and climate plans. If it could
Pietro,
help.
what are your concluding thoughts?
Well, I have the advantage that Helen has said already most of the things that I would have said. Then I subscribe all Helen's conclusion. I just would add something concerning. I think that a little bit we did touch deeply something like to the supply chain of the technologies, meaning that this aspect should characterize more our debate in the future, in the sense that if I realize that, for instance, in Poland has a strong supply chain in offshore wind, I can see how Poland can shift from one generation highly intensive in CO2 to another generation with much lower intensity. This is just an example to say that we should look more at this side of the structure of the energy system, not only at the demand side. This was touched a little bit, I think, by Christoph in his analysis, and when he talks about the life cycle analysis substantially of the batteries, but not only. Critical raw material issue has not emerged in this debate, which is very important. And of course, at the end, what we want to do is a transition which is in favor of the citizen and is not against the citizens. Otherwise, we will fail. Then we have to find the way to make it with the very lower cost for the citizen and show them the benefit of this transition. Otherwise, we will fail.
Indeed. Gilda, what are your key takeaways?
Yes, I'll use an expression that it's often used in Brussels. I think when you look at technologies to support decarbonization, there is no silver bullet. So countries may need a full range of technologies at different levels with different timeframes maybe, but they have all these technologies in their toolbox and they need to be able to use them as long as they support decarbonization. One additional thought, which is building on what Hélène said, which I think is very important, we are really living in an unprecedented time, and the Commission has put forward these ideas and concrete framework to support the recovery and resilience instrument. And I think we have a great opportunity in this sense as a sector, but also as a sector of the economy, to really make the link between the economy and the transition to a cleaner sector, to a cleaner level of activities. So keeping in mind the ambitions of the decarbonisation, I think it's also important that we make this recovery a green one.
Chris, what are your concluding thoughts?
Well, it's been a very interesting discussion. I think for me, it makes me rather optimistic, because I think nobody's putting into any question the goal. Nobody's putting into question that we have to get there as quickly as possible. And I think we have a debate where we do understand one another's issues. And so if we continue to work together, I think we can find a pathway which makes sure that we do meet the goal. Whether it should be one technology or another, and how exactly we should go about that is something that we have to continue to work on. We have to continue to do research and development across a wide range of technologies to make sure that we do end up where we want to be. But overall, I think the message is optimistic. I think we have maybe focused on the technology and not raised these as much as we could have discussed, which is probably a subject of a different discussion, exactly what we have to do in those regions that risk to be left behind in this transition. But overall, I think it's been both interesting and I end up being very optimistic that we can actually do it. Thanks.
Good, a positive note to end with. Finally, Tomasz, what are your key takeaways from today's discussion?
Obviously, there is no one-size-fits-all solution or silver bullet. Even if we subscribe all to the same target, perhaps there are different ways we can get there. And I'm sure that on the EU level, it should be respected in such a way that the whole transition that needs to take place will be just for everyone and no one will be left behind.
Great, thanks. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists for some really interesting contribution, and to you guys at home. There were some really fantastic questions there. Thanks so much for sending those in. Certainly lots to think about here as we move forward. I hope you all enjoyed the debate, and we will see you here next time for the next Euractiv debate.